Hey, welcome everyone to episode 4 of the Fujitsu Impact series, where we explore how organizations can drive real business value with AI. Throughout this series, we've unpacked different dimensions of AI, from adoption and scaling to trustworthiness and orchestration. Today, we tackle another important topic that's shaping AI strategy right now: AI sovereignty, what it really means and why it matters now. It isn't just a regulatory checkbox or compliance burden. It's about control, it's about resilience, and it's about strategic autonomy in an era where AI models shape decisions, economies, supply chains, and national competitiveness. So, to help us navigate this topic, I'm joined by three incredible experts. First, we have Mahesh Krishnan, Regional CTO for Fujitsu Oceania. Next, we have Udo Würtz, CTO of FSAS European Platform Business and Fujitsu Fellow. And also, we'd like to welcome back Dr. Chris Marshall, Vice President IDC Asia Pacific, leading AI, data analytics, and industry research. Thank you all for being here. All right, wonderful. So let's get started. Before we talk about why sovereignty matters, first we need to clear up what it actually is, because this term gets thrown around a lot. Everyone uses the term, but it means different things for different people depending on who you ask. So, Chris, let's start with you. What actually is sovereign AI?
Now, as you mentioned, Carlos, there's a wide range of different definitions out there, but IDC's definition, for what it's worth, is really that sovereign AI refers to a nation's ability to produce and control AI using its own internal resources. That means its own infrastructure, its own data, its own algorithms, its own people, its own business networks. And I think it's also worth thinking a little bit about the history behind the drive to sovereign AI. Frankly, the push for sovereign AI has very much been driven by regulatory concerns in the past, particularly around data privacy, especially in financial services and healthcare. But recently, what's taken over the discussion for sovereign AI is AI's potential impact on national economic and even military competitiveness. And the fear is, of course, that the desire is that they want to reduce a nation's dependence on other countries amidst increasing geopolitical risks. In Asia Pacific, in particular, I think given our dependence on manufacturing and international trade, AI sovereignty conversations are really driven about AI's impacts on risks and supply chains and sort of operational continuity and resilience, not only compliance. So inevitably, what's going to come out of this, I think, and there'll be nuances, and nobody's going to be able to achieve complete AI sovereignty, fully defined, but rather what they will have to do is take much greater control of the various elements of their AI stack and how that supports their own economic competitiveness in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thanks, Chris. So that really helps set the foundation. Now, let's bring that down to the practical misconceptions organizations face. So, Mahesh, from Fujitsu's perspective, what do you see as the biggest misconception about AI sovereignty when you speak with customers?
Look, Carlos, when I talk to customers about AI sovereignty, like a lot of misconceptions come up repeatedly, right? The first is the idea that being sovereign means training your own models from scratch. Now, in reality, very few organizations, even nations for that matter, have the data, compute, or expertise to do this effectively. Also, the money is a big part in this, right? And look, most of the strategic value doesn't come from training anyway. It comes from sovereign inferencing, in my opinion. Now, having control over where and how models run against your data under your security and governance framework. Now, that is what sovereignty truly matters. Now, the second misconception is that sovereignty means isolation. Like many assume it's about cutting yourself off from global innovation or working entirely within national borders. But sovereignty isn't about isolation. It's selective autonomy. It's about being able to collaborate globally while keeping control locally. Now, in other words, you define the trust boundaries, who can access your data, where the AI operates, and how the results are used. Now, I often frame it this way, right? That traditional cloud AI, you take the data to the AI. Sovereign AI, you take the AI to the data. So this kind of like captures it's a mindset shift. So instead of moving like sensitive data into someone else's model, right? Like basically calling OpenAI's ChatGPT with your own data, you bring the intelligence to where your data already resides. So within your legal and operational perimeter, so, maybe it's in your data center or wherever it may be. Now, finally, there's a belief that to be sovereign, you must, own the entire technology stack. Now, in practice, that's neither feasible nor meaningful in a globally kind of like interdependent supply chain. So what matters in my mind is not ownership of every component, but control over the layers that affect your trust posture, governance, policy, deployment, and compliance. Now, in my opinion, like true sovereignty is less about isolation or ownership and more about control, trust, and resilience, like having the freedom to innovate confidently within your own boundaries.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mahesh. So that makes it really clear, and I like the way you put that, bringing the AI to the data. Now, if we look at the bigger picture, this isn't just a technical shift; it's becoming a leadership priority. Chris, IDC shows that sovereign AI is becoming a board-level priority. From your APAC viewpoint, why is this especially critical for manufacturing?
Well, I suppose the point here is that manufacturing is such a big part of particularly Asia Pacific's economy, and sovereign AI is increasingly crucial to the manufacturing sector because it really controls production data, models, infrastructure, and it's, of course, so fundamentally vital for national competitiveness and even security, given the importance of manufacturing to GDP in the region. I mean, APAC manufacturers consistently rely on offshore AI clouds, and by doing so, they're scared, particularly in the wake of things like the Cloud Act in the US, geopolitical risk, extraterritorial laws, potential service disruptions. At least that's the fear. I mean, the reality might not be quite so severe, but again, this is a fear story in many cases. I mean, governments in Asia view foreign AI dependence as a real strategic vulnerability, and this prompts sovereign AI programs to really try to reduce reliance on US on the one hand, and Chinese models and infrastructure on the other hand. And, they all accept, I think, within the region and in Europe too, I suspect, that AI is absolutely essential for things like quality control, robotics, process automation, optimization in many markets. But, I think there's the realization at a national level, like I live in Singapore, and this is something we certainly have on the top of our mind, that Asia Pacific sort of rather fragmented regulatory language, industrial policies that are quite local. There's local language issues, domestic providers, regional models. They need to align better with, if they're going to align with sort of local norms and compliance requirements. And the idea is that, traditional economies of scale that drive a lot of AI practice, AI factories, for example, and sovereign cloud platforms need to be put in place to put across, Asia Pacific to bring, as was mentioned, the compute closer to the data to reduce latency and to make sure that training and inference stay at least within trusted regional or national boundaries. And we actually expect that a large majority, particularly of major Asia Pacific manufacturing companies, are going to be prioritizing AI sovereignty for their mission critical workloads in the next 2 or 3 years. And this is going to shape quite dramatically how companies design their AI stacks and how they actually architect things like manufacturing equipment systems, PLM systems, AI stacks, and analytics stacks across the board.
Okay. Well, thanks, Chris. So that's a powerful perspective, especially the way you've connected sovereignty with operational and geopolitical resilience in manufacturing. Now, if we shift gears to Europe, the landscape looks quite different. Udo, from the European perspective, regulations like the EU AI Act are shaping expectations. How is Europe's regulatory mindset influencing the sovereignty conversation?
Yeah. So thank you for this question. So I think in Europe, focus is heavily on compliance, transparency, and control, of course, right? So we see that customers increasingly demand European technology. So what they would like to really make sure is their strategy autonomy. And there's also a noticeable shift, especially in public sector, as an example, right? So moving away from hyperscalers toward sovereign cloud solutions, open source stacks, but also on-prem, to be honest, right? So a few years ago, we haven't thought this, but this is the case that we will see on a daily basis with customers. So at the end, ultimately, sovereignty for us is about minimizing the dependency risk. I think that's really an important topic. And also ensuring total alignment with local laws like the European AI Act. You already mentioned it in the introduction. So this shift is also driven by the critical need to reduce our over-reliance on US-based tech giants, to be honest. So we really have to ensure that the European innovation remains resilient and independent of external geopolitical shifts, which is not easy, as you know, because of various components and software elements and infrastructures. But Europe is working on this, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks, Udo. That's a great perspective. So now let's shift a little bit from the why to the how. Mahesh, so Fujitsu does a lot of work in the sovereignty space. What technologies are you working on today that make sovereignty possible in practice?
And it's a great question. Look, we do a number of things in the when it comes to in the sovereign space. I'll touch upon three things. Right? One is around sovereign inferencing. I'll touch upon some of the work that we're doing in hardware, and then I'll touch upon some of the stuff we do in research. Right. Let's start with the sovereign inferencing. Now we signed up a strategic partnership with Cohere, which is a Canadian company. We've taken a small stake in the company as well, but more importantly, we've had the strategic partnership. Now, with Cohere, you can install Cohere's models in your server. Customers can basically run and adapt models like Command A or Fujitsu's Takane model within their own infrastructure. And just to elaborate on Takane, right? I mean, like rather than build a model from scratch, we've taken Cohere's model, we fine-tuned it for Japanese language, data, and cultural nuances, right? Now, what you can actually do is you can run these models in your own infrastructure and get the same results as sending it over the cloud and getting the answers back. Now, this is really important. Going back to the thing about taking the AI to the data. Now, this is really, now in this case, we take the AI to the data, into the data center where the data resides, and it doesn't leave your data center at all. So it's from a sovereign inferencing point of view. So from a sovereignty point of view, this is really important. The second one that I want to touch upon is something that we announced recently. We call this sovereign AI service, and they are built to support mission critical operations. So they include CPU, GPUs, and they're completely self-contained, and they can run inferencing workloads within your control. I mean, just not inferencing. You can run your training for that matter as well. But again, this is one step closer to the sovereign AI thing that we talk about. The last point I want to talk about is research. Now we do a lot of research across the board, and we do work in how we can contribute to sovereign AI as well. And I'll touch upon one particular use case. We've been working on something called ConnectIFL, which is research we are doing in federated learning. Now, without getting too much into details, federated learning or FL is great for data sovereignty because it allows training and learning without moving the data itself. The data can reside where it is. But FL itself has several issues like central single point of failure, even model inversion and things like that. But there are ways around it, ways around you have things like decentralized FL or DFL. This is basically like a peer-to-peer model, but they all come with its own problems, right? Now, without getting too much into technical details and boring people, ConnectIFL kind of addresses a lot of these issues, and this is just one area in which we're doing research, right? So look, like I said, we could talk about it all day. There's a lot of stuff that we actually do, but I just thought I'll touch upon those three things.
Right. Oh, thank you, Mahesh. Those are some great points. So the technology side is clearly evolving fast, but of course, technology alone isn't enough. So it has to sit within the right guardrails, which brings us to governance. So Udo, your team works on private GPT and direct customer deployments. How do governance frameworks fit into this picture? Oh, sorry, Udo. I think you're on mute.
Sorry, now
There we
back
go.
again. Okay, sorry guys. Yeah, that's an important topic. So private GPT, which is also using Cohere, but also Takano model, as Mahesh already mentioned it, is a solution which is designed to run entirely within a customer's own data center, or of course private cloud. So which means it stays fully inside of existing governance controls, which is an important topic for customers. So you have to consider most of the customers already have robust governance frameworks in place, right? And sovereign AI, from my personal opinion, works best when you integrate this into them rather than trying to replace them. So the big advantage is really that with third-party AI services, you often have to redo your entire compliance alignment. But when you think about having a sovereign setup, you simply inherit your own existing compliance posture. And that's my view on this.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thanks, Udo. So governance is a strength rather than a barrier, especially when it's built into the customer's own environment. So now let's bring this to life with something a little bit more tangible. Mahesh, can you share some real-world examples where sovereignty really matters?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think sovereignty is really important in a lot of regulated industries like health or banking and so on, or government data. Right now, defense is a great example. I'll give you one specific example in defense. Right, imagine you have like various intelligence reports that come in every day, like highly sensitive, confidential reports, and all of these needs to be summarized and sent out to a select few within the intelligence community. Right. Now this is something that can easily be done by AI with zero human in the loop, and AI, Gen AI is really great for this. Now we can have like a completely air-gapped summarization of all the intelligence report. Right now, when you have a sovereign AI running, you can actually imagine, how sensitive some of this data is. You cannot be sending this across to a chat GPT across the cloud or any of that stuff, right? But when you have all of this running in your data center, right? This can be completely air-gapped. You can have a summarization of all the intelligence report and everything down. Now, this is an example that highlights how valuable something like this can be for the highly regulated or mission critical environment. Now, I mean, there are lots and lots of examples, but I think this probably is one that I would actually use. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Mahesh. So clearly, sovereignty creates real-world impact, especially in sensitive and mission-critical environments. So now, taking a broader view, the momentum isn't limited to healthcare or defense. Chris, which industries are leading in sovereign AI adoption and why?
Well, I think Mahesh sort of mentioned it. Regulated, security-sensitive sectors obviously are pushing hard on sovereign AI adoption. Public sector, defense industries, critical infrastructure, utilities, financial services, healthcare, and to a lesser extent, but I think it's growing quite fast, particularly in Asia-Pac, manufacturing, telco, and some other areas as well. All of these industries tend to manage sensitive, strategically important data about individuals, about patents, about defense, about finances, about IP, etc., where, frankly, any foreign jurisdiction or uncontrolled model training would easily be able to get a hold of, or at least potentially be able to get a hold of, and therefore that would be unacceptable to the host country. And so inevitably they sort of lead to strict sectoral regulation and audit. We're seeing that already in the region. We're seeing a host of new data privacy laws almost on an annual basis in different countries, which are a lot easier to satisfy with sort of in-country compute and sovereign clouds and on-prem services that have very clear data protection and access guarantees. But I think there's a bit more to it than that. I mean, sometimes, for example, in telco or in utilities, any outage or any coercion or any data exfiltration would potentially create some sort of systemic issue at a national level. So again, ultimately underneath the sovereign AI story is a geopolitical pressure and potential foreign legal kind of attacks that make sovereign AI a board level concern. In manufacturing, we talked about a little bit earlier, the priority is very much about IP protection and supply chain resilience, and to some extent, I suppose, vendor dependencies, particularly outside of your trusted network of trusted suppliers. But notice that sovereign AI is a bit of an umbrella term, and all of these motivations differ and lead to slightly different conclusions. So there's not one sort of sovereign AI story that fits all. So you've got to tailor it to fit your specific requirements and realize that nobody is going to be completely, free of sovereign AI risk, if you like. If you're in this space, you've always got dependencies and you have to manage them as best you can.
Well, thank you, Chris. So that it really shows how different industries are moving at different speeds and for very different reasons. Now, let's move to a little more practical part of this conversation for organizations watching today. Udo, when companies want to begin their sovereignty journey, where should they start? How should organizations do this without disrupting daily operations? Oh, apologies, you're on mute again.
I'm sorry for this. I'm still fighting with the microphone. So my advice would be, don't start with the whole estate, the big picture, so to speak, right? So from our perspective, what we see in the project is really to start with a single sensitive workload. So which means also using modular architectures so that your sovereignty really can scale incrementally over time. So using or prioritizing workloads that are directly connected to risk. So think about intellectual property, IP. So we have customers bringing their patent information, the crown jewels, so to speak, into private GPT and make them there available for other processes. But also compliance reporting, which is an important topic, but also operational technology data. So this is where customers are really gaining benefit of using this type of data, bringing it into a device and with AI and then really creating value out of it. So which means at the end that sovereignty doesn't need to be a big bang transformation. It's not a huge project where you kick the tires and I don't know, after 2 years it's done. It is really an incremental process. And this is where you have to be aware of. You also have to make sure that your employees are really skilled in this respect. So you have to do the trainings, you have to take them with you to this journey. But at the end, I think it's a great goal to achieve.
Okay. Well, thanks, Udo. So that's really actionable advice. Now, Chris, beyond governance, what practices should CXOs embed to support sovereign AI?
Well, I think first and foremost is that it is, I mean, as Udo mentioned, it's difficult. It's really very challenging to, to take the whole sovereign AI story lock, stock, and barrel. Instead, CIOs need to sort of slowly integrate sovereign AI thinking into their operating model and engineering practices, and not, frankly, as could easily happen, make it just a governance checklist that happens after the fact. If they can design their architectures with sort of modular containerized stacks, building, sovereign aware data, building strong data privacy, strong MLOps, hybrid infrastructure, engineering guardrails into their infrastructure and supply chains. These are all sensible steps that make it easier to adapt to changing sovereign requirements. I mean, I think one of the things that we have to realize is that the sovereign AI story is still very much in spin, and the geopolitical pressures that are giving rise to it are also very much in spin, and who knows how they'll work out in 2 or 3 years' time. In addition, I think we've got to keep in mind, especially in the manufacturing sector, that things like sourcing and contracting has got to be sovereign aware and sovereign literate, if you like, and you've got to be able to operationalize AI sovereignty, particularly at inference or runtime. It's really important to be able to do that. So.
Okay. All right. Well, that's brilliant, Chris. Thank you very much. So now, before we wrap up, let's have a little fun with a rapid fire true or false round. This to help us bust some myths around sovereign AI. So I'll make a statement, and I'd like you to just come out and say true or false. Ready? Okay, here we go. True or false? Sovereignty is just about where your data sits.
False.
False.
All right. True or false? Compliance slows innovation.
False.
False.
Occasionally. I'm a banker.
I can argue about this, guys, because at the end, in fact, compliance accelerates adoption when it's done right, of course, because it provides
Europeans
really
would say that, though, wouldn't they?
necessary trust for an organization. And this is an important topic also from a customer perspective as well, by the way.
Of course. And
I like the
It's a European style, sorry to say.
I like the phrase that actually people throw around, where America innovates and Europe regulates.
Okay, and one final
Anyway,
one.
I just thought I'll throw that
True
in.
or false? Manufacturing doesn't need sovereign AI.
Definitely false. False. I think.
False.
Um,
Okay.
It's an easy one.
That's an easy one.
All right, wonderful. Okay, so thank you guys. So this brings us to the close of this episode. Now let's leave you with something practical to take back to your organization. So here's a 3-point blueprint for AI sovereignty. First, control models and data, not just infrastructure. 2, embed governance and compliance frameworks from day one. And 3, use technologies like confidential computing and federated AI for resilience. All right, so that's all for today. Thank you, Mahesh, Udo, and Chris, and of course to our wonderful audience joining us today. If you'd like to dive deeper into this topic, simply scan the QR code, which should appear on screen now. There it is. Or you can use the link, which will drop below in the comments. So there you'll find demos, insight papers, and ways to connect with our team. You can also subscribe to our series and get notified about upcoming episodes. And great news, even though our episode's about to end now, we'll be right here for the next 20 minutes to answer all of your questions live. So please drop them in the comments below, and our speakers will be ready to answer all your questions. And if you found this session valuable, please share it with your networker, and let's keep this conversation going. All right, and we'll leave you one final thought. What happens when AI starts making decisions on its own and those decisions go wrong? So that's exactly what we'll explore in the next episode, episode 5, AI security, guardrails, and autonomous systems. All right, everybody, have a wonderful day, and we'll see you there.
Thank you.
Thanks.